So let's jump into the dominant INTJ subtype first. What does this subtype look like?
So the dominant INTJ is, I mean, you kind of get the flavor from the word itself. This is a more assertive INTJ. They're relatively fast reacting. So again, we're comparing this subtype to other INTJs.
Baseline is INTJ at the end of the day.
Exactly. So remember that we're still talking about somebody with those type preferences, but in comparison to other INTJs, they are relatively fast reacting. And in some ways, it's because they've worked things out already. Primarily what they've worked out is how to balance situational demands versus their values and a desire for things being smooth or absolute. So some INTJs struggle with this in a situation that requires them to come to quicker conclusions. They're not sure how they feel about it. They're not sure if whether or not this is going to align with their values. They're not sure if this is going to end up as smooth as they would like. And that is oftentimes what creates the hiccups or the slowing down of the reaction speed. But these INTJs have almost sort of put it in the hopper, right? They've already figured out how to react and respond to environmental requests and also balance it with those things that usually create a throttle. And that's in part why they are so dominant. It's part of the reason why their energy pushes forward into the world and they have more assertiveness, is because that's a big piece of what they've figured out.
I think most INTJs would identify with this idea of being a very process-oriented, focused on measuring twice or 3 times and cutting once. This INTJ is very results-focused. Mm-hmm. What is the end point? What is the result I'm going for? Not just the process to get there.
You got it. That's right. And because of that, they generally make more skilled managers and executives. They lean really hard on analytic skills, particularly language-based reasoning. So this is a big part of why they're able to work things out, like I mentioned, almost figuring it out before they even have to get there. And in Linda Barron's vernacular, they have an in-charge style. They, though, sacrifice some of the brainstorming starburst pattern. So it's not uncommon for INTJs to identify with brainstorming, but this is a type of INTJ that won't. They're a little bit more focused on executive powers, on pre-thinking, on figuring things out before they get there. And so because of that, they're not as good at unstructured creativity.
Yeah, these are the getting things done INTJs. Let's get it done.
Right, exactly. So if they do some of that figuring it out, they're going to do that alone in quiet times by themselves, but they're not going to be, as mentioned, attracted to unstructured creativity. They've likely built some of these in more traditional institutions. So it's not uncommon to find more dominant INTJs in like the military and hospitals, engineering firms, software houses, places where they've really had to step up and take charge and lead. And they're usually in more conventional office spaces. So they're less entrepreneurial, actually. They're more likely to be leading something than they are to be envisioning something and leading people towards that vision. They are good at speaking and listening. And so that's a major part of what they bring to leadership, is that capacity for speaking and leading, or speaking and listening. And they're very good at separating work from play. So their work is their work environment. That's where they bring all their assertiveness. But at the end of the day, they're introverts still. And so a lot of times those strong executive capacities, those characteristics they've built, they require an effortful learning curve, right? They put some time and effort into that. They figured it out. And that's what gives them these qualities, but they're still introverts. They're still going to need that alone time. And so outside of work, they usually are pretty quiet. That's when they're getting their alone time. That's when they're getting their introversion. They're less visual than other INTJs. They tend to be more auditory. So when they're having alone time, they're probably consuming audiobooks or podcasts, that sort of thing. And they have a strong reflective side because, again, they're still INTJs. So when they're not on at work, they are more open to the esoteric, to musings, to things that maybe people at work would be surprised that they're into.
Yeah. So this INTJ is not only okay with hierarchy, they actually prefer it because they want to be at the top of the hierarchy. They would like to be in charge, most likely. These are the leaders, the managers of our world. The INTJ that likes to be in charge, maybe start that company and run that company. I think this is that style here. And so they're totally, I think, okay with a pecking order and all of that top-down structure with a desire to move up the chain of command to the top.
Yeah, exactly. Again, they're not as entrepreneurial, so they're not as likely to be the person who started the company. But like you mentioned, they are usually pretty good at working their way to the top of the food chain.
Yeah.
So some of the careers that attract them. Now, of course, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just gives you an idea of the kinds of careers that help create this style of thinking, but that also a dominant INTJ is going to be attracted to.
Yeah.
So this list will be unsurprising. At the top is a CEO, a chief executive officer. Number 2 is chief technology officer. 3 is a military strategist. 4 is research and development director. 5 is project manager. There's also on the list systems engineer, data analyst, business analyst, operations manager, supply chain manager, software architect, IT manager, financial analyst, policy analyst, and organizational consultant.
I see a lot of managers in there, which would make sense.
And analysts.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, this might mistype for an ENTJ, ESTJ, maybe even a more reserved ENFP, somebody that's like taking charge. It's very creative, but very taking charge, looking for results. They might throw the typing off if you're this style.
Yeah.
Because this isn't a typical, I wouldn't say this is the stereotypical INTJ framework.
No, I think this INTJ is not going to identify with the slow decision-making piece as much. And so they are more likely to, if they are going to mistype as somebody who's leading with extroverted thinking or, like you said, an ETJ type.
Yeah.
And because they're not as into brainstorming, like you mentioned, they could easily mistype as an ESTJ or an ENTJ. That said, that desire and craving for alone time all the time might be the thing that makes them finally, or like at the end of the search, go, no, I have INTJ preferences.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of which, we promised we'd leave it accessible to newbies, but also dive into the more technical piece.
Yeah. So the cognitive functions an INTJ is using, they're learning information with their driver or dominant process of introverted intuition. It's an intuitive process. We've nicknamed it perspectives. It's shifting perspectives to understand the world. And then they make their decisions with their co-pilot or auxiliary of extroverted thinking. We've nicknamed it effectiveness. This is about getting results by the numbers, making something happen in the outer world, extroverting the thinking. Mm-hmm. So these two functions are how an INTJ moves through their world. And the attunement of these two functions is what creates the subtype. So each of these functions can be attuned a little differently. And that's how we get the subtype. So we're still talking about the same two functions, just the way they're expressed. How does this look for a dominant INTJ?
Yeah. So as mentioned, we go into this a little bit more in the podcast we recorded with Dario. So please feel free to go check it out if you want to go further down the rabbit's hole. But just as a sort of a callback to that episode, each function, each cognitive function can have what's called an analytic or a holistic preference. The analytic preference of a function is going to be more assertive. It's more targeted. It has an energy that is quite focused and wants to create an impact, really. It's more targeted, almost like you're focused on a single, end game or end result, regardless of what the function is. The holistic version of a function is the opposite. It's more diffused. It's less targeted, but it also takes in more of a peripheral. So if you think about focusing on, I think of it as two different styles of meditation. When you meditate on a single point in the wall, you're hyper-focused on it, but you can't really see anything in your peripheral. That's more of the analytic bent. A more holistic version would be like Shambhala meditation, which encourages you to lid your eyes. So you can't really focus on anything in front of you, but you see a lot in the peripheral.
Yeah.
Those are two different styles of vision. And I would say that there are good metaphors for the two different styles of how a function can show up. So keeping that in mind, when we're talking about the dominant INTJ subtype, it means both of their preferred functions, both introverted intuition and perspectives and extroverted thinking or effectiveness, both of those have an analytic bent. They're both assertive. They both have that focus and that energy pushing out, more of trying to make an impact on the environment as opposed to being influenced by it. And that makes sense. That makes sense that would create a dominant INTJ.
Well, and it would also make sense the neurotransmitter associated with it, which is testosterone. That's the preferred chemical that this subtype is chasing all the time. And so that analytic, that drive forward mixed with the neurotransmitter creates the dominant subtype.